This process right here takes the information from the database buffer cache and writes to the appropriate data files. So it's writing to the database. If you were going to name this background process, what would you call it if it writes to the database? Database writer. And that's what Oracle calls it. It is called DB WR. And actually you can have more than one database writer. We'll talk about that later. So the database writer takes what's in memory and writes to the appropriate data files. I look at the database writer. He's got a couple personalities. Number one, he's got a chip on his shoulder. Doesn't like the work. He does what we call deferred writes, which is a performance thing. We'll talk about that later. And secondly, he functions as like a hotel room clerk. When somebody wants to see a bunch of new blocks that aren't in the database buffer pool, the database writer has to kick these blocks out of their rooms and write the blocks down to disk to make room for new blocks. So as people are writing new queries, the database writer is constantly writing blocks from memory to disk. And that's why it's important that the database buffer pool be big enough if you're running OLTP applications so the blocks will be in memory. So that's the database writer. The big thing is the database writer performs deferred writes. Every time you and I do an insert, update, or delete, and then do a commit, he does not write immediately. He defers them until later. And you'll see why that's important later on. Let's look at this background process over here way to the right. This takes the information from the redo log buffer pool and writes to the current online group of redo logs. And there's a chapter later on where we'll discuss when the log writer actually writes. What do you think Oracle would call this process that writes to the logs?
Log writer.
The log writer, very good. LGWR. So it's going to write the information to the current group of redo logs. Now there's three other processes that every Oracle 8, 8i, 9i, 10G, and 11G database will have. There's many more processes. My goodness, there must be up to 40 processes now. I don't have room for all of them, but you'll always have these 5. In my opinion, this next process is the Larry Ellison, the CEO of Oracle. The most important process in your Oracle database, excuse me, is a process called SMON. S-M-O-N, the system monitor. And it monitors the system. And these background processes are constantly talking to SMON, and SMON talks back to them. Whenever there's what we call a crash, an instance crash or crash recovery, SMON will perform crash recovery or instance recovery. We'll talk about that at great length a little later on. It also cleans up after sorts and some other things SMON performs as well. Another very important background process is PMON. Anybody want to take a stab at what PMON stands for? Process monitor. It monitors processes. One of the things that you might run into occasionally will be a deadlock detected. An Oracle 60 error, very important. And it's PMON that detects that. PMON also cleans up after aborted processes, very important process. So we have SMON and PMON. OKMON? Now, there really is no OKMON process. One class I was teaching, or OKMON. No, that's just a VBA joke. Then there's another background process that used to be optional in Oracle 7, and I think in Oracle 8 it was no longer optional. It's the checkpoint process. I remember I think I told you earlier, I worked at Oracle Corporation from 1988 to 1993. When I left Oracle, I joined a partner, an Oracle education partner by the name of Database Consultants Incorporated, which later became named as ThinkSpark. And one of the first things the owner had me do was do a 1-hour presentation for SCOUG, South Central Oracle User Group. It was down at InfoMart here in Dallas. And I was doing it on version 7 tuning. And the owner of the company was sitting right in front of me. And this person in the back said, "I know you're not going to talk about this today, but could you quickly tell me the purpose of a checkpoint?" And the owner of the company was doodling, and he knew that could be an hour answer. And he wanted to see how I handled stress in front of about 200 people. So he was chewing gum, and he looked up at me. He was sitting right here and smiled. I did not have this drawing on the board. But what I shared with him, excuse me, was this. Because of the LRU algorithm that exists on the database buffer pool, you could have blocks that keep getting updated, and they could stay in memory forever. And you have to have a mechanism to force the database writer to write those updated committed blocks to your data files. And that mechanism is a checkpoint. And we're going to find out later on in the course, you can control how frequently checkpoints occur. There's parameters that you can control in the SP file. You can also force a checkpoint with a command, and so on. All right, this is an overview. We're almost done. A very important definition. Definition number 2 for you this morning. You know what an Oracle database is. It's comprised of Oracle data files, control files, and redo logs. The second most important definition for you this morning is an Oracle instance. And an Oracle instance is comprised of the SGA and the background processes. We have an entire chapter, I believe it's chapter 3, that shows you're going to actually learn how to start up an instance, the different ways to shut it down. There are several ways to start it up as well. But you need to know what an Oracle instance is. And it's the SGA and the background processes. One other definition that you need to know this morning. You know what an Oracle database is. You now know what an Oracle instance is. When you combine an Oracle database with an instance, anybody here ever play tennis? Okay, what am I doing, getting ready to do here in tennis?
Serve it. Serve it.
Okay, this is called the Oracle server. And what you've got here, you have an Oracle database and you have an instance associated with that database. And this is an Oracle server. The question comes up, can you have multiple instances associated with the same Oracle database? And the answer is yes. That's in the future. We're going to talk about RAC later on, real application clusters, where you have several machines with Oracle instances on them, and on one of the machines you've got the data files and so on, and you hook all the machines up with high-speed fiber optic cables. A lot of people are using RAC. I think I shared with you, I think the largest RAC that I'm aware of is in Japan, 58, 59 nodes, but we'll talk about RAC a little bit later. One thing left to do here, over here in the upper left-hand corner, is the user process. Let's say that this is Bert or Ernie, and they never connect directly to an Oracle database. They have to go through, most of the time, this is a dedicated server process. And a dedicated server process to me is like a real estate agent when you buy a home or sell a home. You have to go through them. There's another way to connect, Oracle Shared Server, but we'll talk about that later. And then this piece right here that you're responsible for sizing and tuning as a DBA is the PGA. And inside the PGA is where you do your sorting, your stack space. Whenever you do sorts in memory, tries to do them in memory. Hopefully most of your sorts can be done in memory, and you won't have to write to temporary data files to do your sorts. And that's over here. That is an overview of the architecture. And now we're ready to get in our class notes and take off from there. And that's all I have on this one.